Okay, good morning and welcome to all of our viewers. We are delighted you could join us. I'm State Senator Barbara Favola. I represent the 31st Senate District, which includes parts of Arlington, Fairfax, and Loudoun. I did serve on the Arlington County Board for many years and of course have been an active parent. I served on the Joint Education Reform Commission in the General Assembly, and I chair the Rehab and Social Services Committee. That's an abbreviated introduction. I will make a very abbreviated introduction of my esteemed panelists. They have very accomplished resumes, but we'll be brief because I know the topic before us is near and dear to many of you, and you're very anxious to engage in a conversation about how we open our schools in the fall. Joining me is my colleague, Delegate Kathleen Murphy, and Delegate Murphy represents portions of Fairfax and Loudoun, and Delegate Murphy's delegate district is in my Senate district, so we overlap, and it is a pleasure to always work with you, Kathleen, and thank you for joining us. You've been a great school advocate.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Also with us is Atoosa Reaser, and I knew Atoosa when she first decided she was going to run for the school board. Atoosa represents the Algonquian district on the Loudoun County School Board, and Atoosa is vice chair of the school board and chair of the Legislative and Policy Committee, among other responsibilities. Atoosa is a practicing lawyer in Loudoun, and we are delighted to have you with us. So thank you, Atoosa.
Good morning. Thank you.
Sure. Now I'm going to move up to the folks who have more direct responsibility over the question on opening schools. I will turn to Dr. Leslie Sale, who is with the Virginia Department of Education. Dr. Sale is the director of the policy office. Leslie, if I may, has a PhD in political science and has been involved with the Department of Education for some time. We appreciate your collaborative approach to reaching out to our school districts, and we look forward to hearing a little bit more about the state guidance. And then we have our main panelist, who will probably have to field most of the questions, but he's very capable, Dr. Eric Williams. Dr. Williams is the superintendent for the Loudoun County Public Schools. I've had several meetings with you and your team, Dr. Williams. You are very dedicated, very on top of things. The Loudoun residents are they're very lucky to have you at the helm. So to start off our discussion today, I am going to before I turn it over to Dr. Williams, I want to introduce one other person, my Chief of Staff, Julia Chun. Julia will be fielding questions that come in online. We will try to coordinate the questions in a way that we touch on the major themes that individuals are most interested in. But to start us off, so we all have a framework for figuring this out, I'm going to turn to Dr. Williams, who I believe has a presentation to make.
Good morning. So I've been asked to give an overview to set the context for the Q&A today, and I'll make sure that I limit the overview to no more than 20 minutes to allow significant time for Q&A. And so in these remarks, I'm going to provide some context in terms of the guidance from state officials and from state and national public health officials. And then I will give you a sense of what we're considering in Loudoun counties, in what ways we would be following guidance, in what way we might do some select deviations from that guidance, and what are the schedules that we're considering for students for the new school year. And so, as many of you know, the governor recently released a plan that aligns the school reopening phases with the forward Virginia phases. And so that plan provides guidance regarding the operation of schools in each phase. And I want to be explicit that we want to maximize in-person safe learning experiences. In-person is a key phrase, and safe is a key phrase. First of all, in terms of our desire to return to 100% in-person learning as soon as it's safe to do so relates to our recognition of how tough it's been this past spring. While I'm proud of our educators for what they've been able to provide, and I am deeply appreciative of parents and the significant support they provided while fulfilling other responsibilities to their children's education. And I'm also appreciative of the resilience of students. Given all of that, we know that distance learning, even an improved version of distance learning, is no substitute for 100% in-person learning. So that would be our priority to implement as soon as it's safe to do so. So the governor's key document that he released is entitled Phase Guidance for Virginia Schools. And this morning I'm going to focus on Phase 3, but know that the guidance also has specific information about how schools can operate, what level of operations in Phase 1 and 2, and what public health mitigation strategies should be implemented. But because we are hopeful that we will be able to enter Phase 3 in the not too distant future, I'm going to focus this morning on the phase guidance for Phase 3, and also the schedules that we're considering for Phase 3. So I'm not going to address each of these, but in great depth. But in addition to the 6 feet separation guidance, the state guidance calls for a requirement of the use of cloth face coverings by staff when at least 6 feet of separation cannot be maintained. So, for example, if the teacher is standing 7 feet away from a student, then a cloth face covering wouldn't be required. But if a teacher is standing next to a student, that requirement would be in place. So the state guidance suggests encouraging the use of face coverings in students as developmentally appropriate, again, when 6 feet of physical separation cannot be maintained. So there's a number of other ones listed there. I'm going to reference just one other before moving on, and that is the one that's like the 6th one pertaining to buses. It says physical distance should be created between students on buses when possible. And this is the exact wording from it, e.g. seat children every other row, limiting capacity as needed. And I'll talk about how, I'll talk about that one in more detail momentarily. So basically the phase guidance, the state document is specific in terms of referencing the in-person learning, but with strict physical distancing, and also in terms of referencing distance learning as supplementing in-person learning. So this is an interesting topic, and that's the practice of self-quarantining of close contacts and the implications for the operation of schools. And so we work very closely, communicating daily with the Loudoun County Health Department. And so they would, once school, as they do now, once school's open, they would notify close contacts of positive cases to advise them to self-quarantine at home. And so obviously when someone's self-quarantining, they wouldn't be able to work at school or participate in in-person learning. But the volume of close contacts would determine the extent to which in-person learning and work would be paused. And so the Loudoun County Health Department observes that the quarantining of an entire class could occur in some situations. So obviously that would involve pausing of in-person learning for that class. And we've asked the health department, in what situations would they recommend closure? And they said that they'd be likely to recommend closure if significant absenteeism of an entire school. If significant absenteeism occurs due to an unknown illness and or if a known case had significant interactions throughout the school so that we couldn't close off just a portion of the facility or quarantine a portion of the student body. So the state health commissioner issued a binding order of public health that requires every school division before we open to submit to the state a plan for outlining our public health mitigation strategies. And it says that that should be consistent with CDC and Virginia Department of Health mitigation measures. The phase guidance for Virginia schools released by the governor states that that school divisions should make decisions in implementing such guidance, and that if we assume any additional risk, we should do so in consultation with local health departments and school board attorneys. And there's a form that's entitled Notification of Intent to Vary from Phase Guidance for Virginia Schools that allows divisions to document any deviations from guidance. So let me cut to the chase in terms of the schedules that we're considering for phase 3. Now remember, if we're not in phase 3, if we're in phase 1 and 2, for example, or if we were to revert phase 0, these wouldn't be operating here. And similarly, it's also important to note that if we're beyond phase 3, this isn't what schooling would look like, okay? So is it possible that we could be beyond phase 3? Yes, that's possible when we open the school year. So this is really doing a deeper dive on what if we're in phase 3. So first of all, the approach that's under consideration in Loudoun County Public Schools is generally adhering to the phase guidance. So we are generally planning on relying on the local, state, and national public health experts, and then the guidance from other state officials, but with limited deviations. And so that would support a combination of in-person learning and distance learning. And again, our preference is for 100% in-person learning, but if we're going to generally adhere to the phase guidance, the implications are is that we'll have a combination of in-person learning and distance learning. So the schedules that we're considering currently would include 2 days of in-person learning and 3 days of distance learning. And the distance learning days would alternate. So students, for example, would attend school in person Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday. And students could include more than 2 days of, schedules could include more than 2 days of in-person learning for a limited number of students. So some students with disabilities and some English learners. And then the last general observation I'll provide in terms of the schedules is that if we have an 8-period AB or AABB day schedule for secondary students that's similar to the previous schedule before school closure, that would support transitions among phases and eventually after phase 3. So we're not looking at drastically different schedules. That's not our key focus, because it would make it harder to transition out of phase 3 and into a more normal schedule. And so you'll see those 8 periods at the secondary level aren't all on the same day, at least the primary schedule we're looking at. But the fact that kids would have 8 periods as part of their schedule is more similar to our current schedule. So let me talk about some of the specifics of the public health mitigation strategies and how they affect our schedules. So this sketch shows an elementary classroom with 10 students. And you'll see that there are faint circles that wouldn't literally be drawn on classroom floors. So they're not literal circles, they're circles to help us plan how much space is allocated to students. So this sketch shows 4-foot circles around each student with a 1-foot inner circle for the student and then another 3 feet of space. So if you add up that 3 feet of space outside the inner circle with the 3 feet of space in the circle next to that kid, then you've got 6 feet of physical distancing. And again, students as developmentally appropriate, and teachers would wear cloth face coverings when 6-foot separation is not possible because of movement within the classroom. Now, we need to be realistic about the level of protection that's provided with this approach, because there absolutely, public health officials will say the 6 feet of separation provides mitigation of risk. However, it's going to be hard to maintain that at all moments with kids moving within the classroom, and even like whether or not they're consistently wearing face coverings, or whether or not kids under 10 would their parents choose to have them wear face coverings even when 6 feet of separation is not possible. So this is, according to public health officials, this is significantly better at mitigating risk, but I'm just saying it's not, there's not a complete elimination of risk. I'll quickly show a high school version of this diagram, and it shows 11 students.
Yeah.
So we are considering limited deviation from the phase guidance in order to increase classroom capacity. And so, as I said, we do have the ability to notify the state of any deviations. And so this diagram shows 17 students in the same size elementary classroom. And that's achieved because it eliminates the 1-foot circle. And so it's a 3-foot circle. And so it's not that complete 6 feet of separation, because the 6 feet here is measured from the center of a kid's head to the center of another kid's head. So there's not 6 feet between them. And so that modification does allow us to get to 17 students. It's still not a normal class size. And so what we're considering is that we would shoot for the 4-foot circles in as many classrooms as possible in order to pull off the 2 days of in-person learning schedule, but that in some situations we have to do some deviations like this. And that's particularly important to do because of our interest in having some students attend school more than twice a week. So let me move quickly to bus capacity, because it's another limiting factor. Again, the first bullet quotes the exact language from the phase guidance issued by the governor, and that sets forth the 1 child per seat parameter. Even that, that sets forth the 1 child every other row. But even that is not quite 6 feet, but what we would be doing is seeking to do that on most buses, and that would allow us 13 students on a 77 passenger bus, 14 on an 84 passenger bus. In order to try to get better capacity, we'd increase the number of our double runs, so having buses bring 2 different groups of students to school each morning and afternoon, so they make 1 run, then come back to a different part of the neighborhood, and that same bus brings another group of students. We also might need to adjust some start and end times of schools in order for some scheduling efficiency. But again, just like with classroom capacity, we're considering some limited deviation, and because even with more double runs and the possibility of changed start and end times, it's likely we would need to have some buses have more students, so up to 26 students on a 77 passenger bus and up to 28 on an 84 passenger bus. And we do that by having kids at a maximum seated in every row. And as a mitigation strategy, we're considering requiring kids 10 and older then to wear a face covering. That would apply to the bus, and we'd encourage parents to encourage their kids, if they think it's developmentally appropriate, to wear it. And so basically what you see, like even these deviations are necessary to pull off the 2 days a week of in-person learning. What we're not considering is just a complete disregard of the phase guidance and the recommendations. So we're not considering normal bus seating and normal seating in classrooms with kids a foot apart from one another in order to have daily in-person learning. And we get it. We know this is not a substitute. We know how hard this is for the community. We hear you, but what we're considering are the more limited deviations rather than disregard of the guidance from public health officials. Now, in terms of distance learning, we are working towards the goal of providing 100% distance learning for students whose parents do not want them to attend school in person. But what I will say is, shifting more broadly to the topic of distance learning, this applies not just for those students who choose to be in 100% distance learning. This applies to any distance learning that we would do next year. Is we've learned some lessons from this past spring, and we're still processing that. We will be reviewing data from the parent and teacher survey that we're doing now to help us finalize what the distance learning parameters would be. But this slide shows some generalizations about it, and that's that there'd be greater structure in schedules. We've heard from parents, students, and teachers that that's important. Also, the synchronous and asynchronous work time expectations would be greater. And by synchronous, all that means is live, interactive, online interactions, and asynchronous is work students do independently, not live. And so I see that we've accidentally repeated one of the bullets there, but the others refer to, we would be doing grading of student work. We have required attendance both for in-person and distance learning. And then also we recognize the importance of extracurricular activities, and that will be a key part of any distance learning, and also for that matter, in-person learning as well. So let me quickly look at a couple sample student schedules. We published narratives of a week in the life of an elementary student, Sebastian, and a week in the life of Anna, a high school student. And in Sebastian's schedule at the elementary level, you see he's in school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He starts each day with a morning meeting, whether he's in person at school or whether or not he's joining synchronously online. So the whole class is together to start each day for about 30 minutes, whether it's like a combination of calendar math, like they do oftentimes in person, and whether or not it's also like what we worked on yesterday, what we'll be doing today, whether you're in person or at home. And so from a teacher standpoint, they're basically doing a really similar lesson on Monday as they are on Tuesday, but they're doing it with different groups of students. I'll also say that Sebastian comes to school like other students based on, generally speaking, his last name. There would be modifications to that, but generally speaking, the concept is kids in the same household, regardless of level, would be in school the same days. So at the high school level, similar. Anna has in-person learning on Monday, Wednesdays, and distance learning on Tuesday, Thursday. She starts each day connecting with her advisory group or her homeroom, and she's either doing that in person or synchronously through the LCPS issued Google Chromebook. And by the way, we're also, all of our students now have Google Chromebook in grades 3 to 12, and we're supportive of school board support. We're appreciative of school board support to allow us to provide those Chromebooks to kids at K through 2 before the school year starts. So really quickly, let me just show that this illustrates that some students attend school more than twice weekly. And so in this particular elementary class, all the students in yellow attend twice a week, and then 4 or 5 students attend school more than twice a week, specifically 3 times a week. So this just illustrates that it's a limited number of students. So finally, what I'd like to share with you is that we have additional detailed information online that you may wish to check out. If you go to the URL listed at the top of this slide, lcps.org/return to school 2020, there's a tab for student experience stories, and these are the week in the life stories for Sebastian and Anna. and then there's supplemental information. You can actually get that same supplemental information through the student experience stories and clicking on links, but if you just want to go in and look at particular topics, you can. And then we also have a specific tab on guidance regarding the public health precautions and explaining what that guidance is, and really sharing some of the information I've shared with you verbally today on some of the deviations that we are considering from that guidance. And then there's also a video here that's about 15-minute long. The English version is about 15 minutes long. And that's centered on presenting information about what we're considering, but also looking at it through the eyes of Sebastian and Anna. And the English version can be watched with subtitles in foreign languages, including Spanish, among others. And then there's also a Spanish version in which much of it is in Spanish with other subtitles available, and that's available from this homepage as well. So that concludes my overview this morning, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we can return to the normal view. Thank you for the opportunity to share that overview.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. That was very comprehensive. Clearly, you're doing a lot of thinking and planning. So that's the best approach, since we don't really know what we'll be facing, week to week. I'm now going to turn to Dr. Sale and give you the opportunity to add or change or amend the presentation that Dr. Williams made. Not that you want to make strict amendments, but if you have any comments that the Loudoun County Public School administrator should take into account, we'd like to hear that.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me this morning. I appreciate it. To be honest, I don't know if I could provide much more. As Senator Favola mentioned, Dr. Williams' presentation was very comprehensive and indicative of a lot of thought and consideration on the part of Loudoun County Schools leadership and the school board. And so, I think from a very high level state perspective, that's what we're looking for from our school divisions. We know that it's going to look different in every division, and frankly in every school, and so just that level of thoughtfulness and making sure that we're doing our best to educate and keep folks safe. And with that being said, I think Dr. Williams' presentation kind of really hit on the two priorities that we were seeking to balance through the governor's phase guidance, as well as some additional guidance information that we provided from the state level. Of course, that's the guiding priority being, how can we reintroduce in-person instruction and make that available to all of our students, but also balancing the health and well-being of our students and staff in our school divisions. And at the moment, of course, there are a little bit of competing priorities in finding that perfect balance, but the goal is to maximize both. And then, as Dr. Williams mentioned, our current phase guidance does recognize that each of our school divisions and schools are going to look a little bit different, both in terms of their public health metrics, so how the virus has impacted that individual community, which will, of course, facilitate some different in-person instruction options. And each of these schools and school divisions will have different capacities. So even just physical space in your building will be determinant for how many students you can fit there at any given time for in-person instruction. And also Dr. Williams noted that, although we've provided these pieces of guidance and recommendations for both what in-person instruction should look like, as well as health mitigation strategies as we move through the phases, that school divisions that are seeking to provide more in-person instruction that's recommended at any given phase, or consider some different health mitigation strategies than were laid out in the phase guidance, there is the opportunity to do that through the notice of intent to vary. And again, the kind of core core concept there is to make sure that if our school divisions are electing to execute some discretion and move away from the recommendations, that they're doing so thoughtfully and in consultation with the key stakeholders to make sure everyone's being healthy and safe. I will just add to Dr. Williams' presentation. So the phased guidance of Virginia schools coming from the governor's office is the kind of predominant guiding document for us at the moment as we look at what in-person instruction will look like for 2020, 2021. But from the state level, the Virginia Department of Education has also provided school divisions with a, as we refer to it, the Big Book of Guidance, which is referred to, or is more formally called Recover, Redesign, and Restart. And for parents who are interested, you know, this document was really built with our school divisions in mind to provide questions and framing discussions that will be important for our school division leaders and thinking about what reopening looks like. But it's also helpful, I think, for our parents to see all of the different moving parts that are going into these conversations and how they are all kind of gears in the same machine and all part of a similar machinery that every piece has to fit together, and it's a lot of thinking to do, frankly. So I think it's helpful for parents to see kind of, again, all of those pieces of the puzzle. And then of course the Department of Education has also just updated their frequently asked questions page specific to reopening. So whereas we had a running list of questions for all of the items that were coming up kind of real time as we were navigating uncharted territory and the school closures and now moving into summer, we are thinking about and trying to anticipate some of the questions that our constituents have for reopening, and so have created a curated FAQ specific to reopening that's available on the Virginia Department of Education webpage, which I think reiterates a lot of what we've discussed here today, and probably goes a bit above and beyond on some of the specifics for in-person instruction and health mitigation strategies.
For our viewers, though, that the link will be the frequently asked questions. We will be posting everywhere we can, not only on all our Facebook pages, but I'm sure the Loudoun County Public Schools page will have all appropriate links to state guidance and frequently asked questions. And the Loudoun County School Board page, I think, would do the same. Is that correct, Atoosa? Oh. You're muted?
Muted still, yes, thank you. I saw that at the same time. Our Loudoun County School Board page is housed as part of the school divisions page. So typically we have posted just on the continuity of education page, all of the things that have been necessary during the spring's distance learning. And I believe the school division will consolidate everything in one place so that it's easy for families to find.
Okay, just wanted to make that point. Dr. Sale, I may have interrupted you. Do you have anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, no, the only other thing I guess I would mention as we move into the question and answer segment is that, of course, here to provide as much information as I can today. And if there's anything that, you know, we don't have a fully developed answer for yet, or don't have the information offhand, I will also make my information available to Senator Favola and Delegate Murphy, so you can contact me directly, and I will take notes as well to bring these back to my team. So if there's anything I can't address here today, I will get an answer for you.
Oh, great. That's always good to hear. Thank you. One of the questions that has come up deals with some of the extra supports that are frequently part of a classroom setting, such as, you know, special education teachers or your SPED teachers. Under your in-person social distancing model, Dr. Williams, will you be able to integrate some of these other specialized services into the classroom, into a regular classroom?
Yes, so just as they do now, general education teachers will continue to plan with, and in some instances co-teach with students of teachers with disabilities, and so that will continue. Now again, I don't want to say that this hybrid model or blended model is a substitute for what that it's the same level of quality. It's not what we would like, but yes, that process will continue. And there was a related question in the chat box about how it will be determined which students with disabilities or which English learners might be able to participate in attend school in person more than 2 days a week. And so that IEP teams would play a key role in that process. And not only would the IEP team need to conclude that that was appropriate, but of course the parents would need to agree that they wanted the additional in-person learning. There's also a number of other topics in terms of students with disabilities that I want to mention. So we have some medically fragile students that may require additional support. So student health staff will facilitate collaboration between the school-based team and the parent and guardian to facilitate that healthcare planning process. We also have a limited number of students who attend school in a private day setting with which Loudoun County contracts. So we continue to collaborate with those private day providers during the school closure, and we'll do so heading into the new year. I'll also say that there has been an extension of the special education eligibility process for some students during the school closure. And so we need to revisit those eligibilities and complete that process. So those are a few of examples of the topics that we're looking at as we consider how we can best support our students with disabilities.
It sounds like there may be lots of remaining questions in terms of what our students with disabilities might need and how we can best provide those services. So do you have a committee composed of parents with students with disabilities who will be involved in helping to plan this?
So we will continue to work with the Special Education Advisory Committee, but a key role is just those parents of students themselves in terms of working with the students' IEP team at school.
Okay.
I could add something, Senator Favola.
Yes,
one of the things that the school division did over the last 2 months was to involve both the Special Education Advisory Committee, the Minority Student Achievement Advisory Committee, and about 250 or so other, altogether, stakeholders in a number of focus groups as they did scenario planning. And each of us as school board members had the opportunity to appoint up to 5 parent representatives from our communities to take part in both phase 2 and phase 3 of the planning scenarios, which is how we wound up with what Dr. Williams presented today. So I want to thank those volunteers who spent the time going in and, well, I suppose virtually going into the meetings and participating and bringing feedback back to me so that we can continue to work on making the plan better. The plan was just presented to us as a board on Tuesday of this past evening, and we have other meetings set up to continue to work with the school division to include further constituent input as we improve that.
That's great. Thank you, Atoosa. That was very helpful.
Sure.
Some of the other questions evolved actually around the teachers and what will be expected of the teachers in terms of lesson plans, or if teachers feel they may be vulnerable and not in a position to teach in person. How will the issues that teachers may have to face, both personally and under the expected combination reopening plan, how will their issues be addressed? You're muted.
Thank you. I clicked it and then clicked it back. I want to acknowledge again that this is incredibly difficult for all parties involved, parents, students, teachers, other staff members, general community. And so it is hard for teachers to shift. They didn't sign up for, this isn't the job they signed up for, but they've really stepped up to the plate. But in terms of our approach, we are really, it is a delicate balancing act to make sure that the workload is manageable for teachers, because parents and students may be saying, okay, these are some things we'd like to see. And so what we want to do is craft schedules that have high quality teaching and learning, but that includes having a manageable workload for teachers. One big issue is just childcare, and there's multiple questions on childcare submitted, and that's an issue for LCPS staff members and for the broader community. And I want to share something that we were considering early on and went over very poorly in our focus group discussions. Ms. Reaser mentioned that we had dozens of focus groups with close to 250 people or so. And in some of them, the trial balloon was floated of having all K-5 students go to school every day, and all middle and high school students have 100% distance learning. And the concept was, in order to have the space needed to practice physical distancing, we would use all schools in the division, including middle and high schools, to serve elementary students. So we floated this option in the spirit of out-of-the-box thinking, but that trial balloon didn't make it very far off the ground. The feedback we got was some parents reacting at the elementary levels, hey, so our kids are the guinea pigs that are going in, and at the high school level saying, well, that's not fair, we want in-person learning too. And so that's not a focus for us at this point in time. But that still leaves the very real challenge for us, and focusing right now on teachers, that leaves the very real challenge of, so what are they gonna do? We do not, so one option would be to scale back the frequency of in-person learning for other students and have other kids, have teachers' kids, have or other staff members get priority access to in-person learning. So, but that would limit our ability to bring in English learners or some English learners or some students with disabilities more frequently. And even trying to find space, at the school would be difficult. The last thing I'll say on childcare is that we have started conversations with the county, and I'm greatly appreciative that they're interested in taking a look at whether or not they may be able to provide some limited number of childcare spots for LCPS employees. And so we're still in early stages of conversation with them. Don't know whether I would meet the demand that would exist or not, but that is at least something that we are exploring.
Right. I do feel for working parents, not everybody will be able to telecommute, come September, and they need to feel that their children are safe and well cared for. I know that private childcare companies will be allowed to open up. They're allowed under phase 2 if they follow certain social distancing practices, but that's not the same as an educational environment where children are really getting an appropriate curriculum. What are some of the other general areas, Julia, that we should be addressing based on questions coming in?
So based on some of the pre-submitted questions, I think almost everything was answered, except for a few questions dealing with the flexibility of high school classes, being able to switch classes or pull out of certain classes.
Well, that's yet another question. I don't know how you manage all the scheduling requirements as well as the space requirements and the social distancing requirements. Superintendent Williams, would you like to answer that? And I'd also like to hear from our school board member, Ms. Reaser, on that question.
So, and I may need some greater assistance. I have been skimming the questions and I'm not sure I saw one specifically relating to high school schedules. If the question was ability to withdraw from particular courses, I will say that we have been, principals in the last several weeks have begun to play an increasing role. They've been involved at a general level, but they've been playing an increasing role in terms of saying, okay, as the contours of a division approach become more evident, and we've got this emerging division level approach, what's it going to look like at the school level? Because it's the school level that's going to make it a reality. And so, for example, procedures for arriving at school and asking and doing the health screenings. The division can provide general parameters, but the school needs to make it happen. And that applies as well to specifics in terms of students withdrawing for particular schools. And so that would be something that at the school level there would be discussions about, okay, what are the procedures going to be for students if they have an interest in withdrawing from one class and entering into another. I'm not even sure that was the particular question because I didn't see it, the written question, but that was what I processed when I heard you verbally reference withdrawing from classes.
I think that's very close to what was asked. It was a question that was submitted earlier when we first advertised the meeting. But Ms. Reaser, do you expect the school board to continue to accept input on the proposed plan going forward? There's a question about whether the plan Dr. Williams presented is a done deal or whether there can still be some changes and tweaks.
I absolutely expect to continue to have input and to be able to incorporate it in suggestions that I make. And I have to be careful to speak for myself. We are a board of 9, so I just want to put that out there that I do believe there is consensus among our board that we want to continue to receive input so that we can do our job better. That is one of our main goals, is to represent the voice of our constituents. That includes the parents and the teachers and the students. And kind of tying back into the question that was previously posed to Dr. Williams, I did have conversations with parents and teachers about some of the courses that the students had elected. This spring, counselors actually met virtually with students to give them the opportunity to do course selection. And so we continued providing services as we could in that manner. But I think in specific, and I've talked with Dr. Williams some about concerns around band. I've had conversations with band directors, and I think I saw a question in the chat about this. The guidance about spacing in a band classroom is a little bit different than a regular classroom. And the number of kids in a band classroom are often many more than a regular classroom. And the space, while it's bigger, generally doesn't accommodate having 10 feet or enough space. So there are concerns about whether blowing through instruments or choir is something that children are safe doing. But on the same token, just like with every other issue surrounding this upcoming school year, people feel very strongly that extracurriculars should continue, that for mental health, the kids need to have a balanced approach. So I think the best thing we can do as a school division is to offer choices and options that work for everyone. I think that if we can accommodate allowing kids to make a class schedule change, we should try to do that, and probably do that sooner rather than later, because the closer we get to August, I mean, it becomes
Right.
a little bit of a burden to ask the teachers to shift and the administration to make those changes.
I'm just curious, do you expect to be putting up these relocatables to add to your space options at certain schools? That question just popped into my head. It wasn't in the chat.
So it's both an issue of space and staffing in terms of having the staffing. First of all, the modular classrooms are not inexpensive endeavors.
Okay.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars for one classroom space, and then you also need to have the staffing for it. We had to cut approximately 6% of our budget as a result of Loudoun County and the state needing to freeze some revenues that would have otherwise been appropriated to us. And so we also are, of course, operating within financial constraints. If you'd like, I've seen a few other questions from the chat that I can address.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead? We've got about another 10 minutes. So
Yes.
I will ask if at the end of this conversation, I want to know what you would task the state to go back and do, whether it's more resources or more flexibility. Maybe you, Dr. Williams, and you, Ms. Reaser, can give us some direction. We want to help. Go ahead, Dr. Williams.
So I'll just quickly address a couple of miscellaneous questions. One of the questions was about waivers, whether or not standards of learning exams will be canceled next year like they were this year. And State Superintendent of Public Instruction has, and actually Dr. Sale can comment on this, but State Superintendent of Public Instruction has commented that we will wait, that the state's plan is to wait to get through the start of the school year in order to assess what the nature of their interaction with the federal government, because at this point in time, the federal government has not indicated any interest to remove the requirement on states to administer assessments. And that actually, as soon as I started to answer, I realized this might be something that Dr. Sale has much more up-to-date information. So before going to a couple other topics I was going to address, I'll defer to Dr. Sale to see if there's things she wants to add.
Well, I can't scoop you on that. That's still the case. And I would just say that, the standards of learning assessments play an important role for us, A, for our state accountability system, but B, also to make sure that we are identifying students that might need some additional instruction or specialized instruction. And so to the extent that they are an important part of making sure that we're doing our jobs well, we want to be thoughtful before, saying that they're canceled or suspended for the upcoming year. But as Dr. Williams mentioned, they're also an important part of our federal accountability measures. And so it will really be dependent on what the federal governments and the U.S. Department of Education provides in terms of flexibility to states for assessments as they relate to accountability. So that one is a tentative and pending one based on some upcoming information that we expect to get from USED. Mm-hmm.
I would hope we could provide school systems with more flexibility in terms of assessing progress and meeting the goals of the standards of learning, as opposed to just that standardized test. I know over time we have given school systems more tools in the toolbox, but I would argue that this context that we're in now strengthens the need for more tools in the toolbox rather than just the traditional.
And excuse me, Senator Favola.
No,
I was just going to say, and I think we absolutely agree here. I think this has been an ongoing discussion for us as a department and both the Board of Education on what measuring success looks like in the classroom, and it's not strictly about our standardized test. And then, of course, as a kind of our educational landscape and the sands of the educational landscape are shifting under our feet, using this opportunity to be creative and think bigger. So it's an ongoing discussion for us as well. So it's operating in the space that we're kind of used to and comfortable with, of course, with federal requirements, but also trying to be creative here. So that will be an ongoing discussion. But thank you.
Dr. Williams, you get to answer one more question or one more cluster of questions before we conclude the panel discussion.
So I'll be very brief because I know you want to allow a little bit of time for closing remarks for folks. We have not, we have focused on this hybrid model as a result of really just the logic of coming to this blended model based on we want as much in-person learning as possible, but it's been our intent to generally comply with the guidance from not only local and state health officials and state officials, but also national public health officials, Centers for Disease Control. And so that's really, we've collaborated with Arlington, Fairfax County, Prince William County, other Northern Virginia divisions, and it's very common to be looking at this type of blended model. So that's not emerging from ideas from any outside group that's provided assistance in facilitating focus groups.
Okay.
Also, the final thing I'll mention is we've not been focused on an AM/PM schedule, because while we could do that a few years ago on a limited basis with kindergarten classes, our buses and drivers are busy practically the entire day doing one circuit of elementary, middle, and high schools. So it's just logistically not feasible to do that twice in a day.
Okay, well, this brings us right to just about 11 o'clock. I will ask my panelists if there's one thought they would like to leave with our audience before we conclude. Ms. Reaser, I thank you for your service on the school board, and what would you like to leave our listeners with?
Well, first, I'd just like to thank you, Barbara, Kathleen, and Dr. Sale and Dr. Williams for the opportunity to give some outreach and hear input from our constituents, our shared constituents. I suppose I'll answer your question as my final thought, which is, what can the state do for us? I would ask that in August, if you reconvene and going forward, that there be some consideration for some of the things that were taken out of the budget for schools. We did in Loudoun County go ahead and during our reconciliation process increase mental health support by adding counselors, even though it was, even though there were some cuts. We also would like to give our teachers pay raises. We're asking more of them now than we've ever asked of them before. And the schools, we can all see now, are the crux of what takes care of our community, whether it's food, education, a safe place to be, an ear to listen to, eyes on a student every single day. And our businesses are important. They're getting the support that they need, but the schools are getting budget cuts. So I would ask for you to advocate for us to be able to take care of the people that are taking care of everyone's children. Thank you.
We will absolutely. I won't speak for Kathleen, but we will do our best. I'm hoping the HEROES Act passes. That will be another chunk of money coming to the states, and the states then will be able to allocate those dollars where we see the greatest need. And I agree with you. Our education system has got to be right up there. So thank you for your comment. Kathleen?
Yeah, well, thank you, Barbara, for putting this together. We can always count on Senator Favola to organize people. I've watched the questions as they come in, and there's so many that weren't able to be addressed in this particular panel because of the time that we've had. And perhaps it would be a good idea if we schedule one more of these before the start of school, so we can ensure that people are heard and their concerns are addressed.
Sure.
Thank you for participating, everyone. I've learned a lot today, and always appreciate the most organized senator that we've ever had. Senator Favola is able to pull these together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for participating. We appreciate your support. Dr. Sale, would you have one final thought for us?
Sure. Well, I guess I would just like to echo, Ms. Reaser's comment about, I think this is something we all knew before, but this experience really bringing to light just how central, education and educational infrastructure are to society generally. And so I think it's important moving forward that we continue to keep that top of mind. And as I was scrolling through the questions and comments, I think the emphasis here was a lot on how we get back to kind of a normal and in-person instruction. But we are also certainly thinking about things more holistically. And it sounds like the community is as well, that it's not just about, the quality of education, which is about most important, but about mental health, both for students and staff. And so we'll continue to think about this as, a holistic kind of challenge to overcome together and navigate together. So that being, part of a multitude of things. So of course, quality of education, but also making sure the health and general well-being of everyone is considered and kept at top of mind as well. But again, thank you to Senator Favola and Delegate Murphy for having me on. And of course, I will continue to be available in future conversations and offline to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Well, Dr. Williams, I guess you'll have the final thought. We appreciate the fact that you're so welcoming and that you will, in fact, take comments from so many of our stakeholder groups. So go ahead.
Well, thank you. I've appreciated this opportunity. And I just want to reemphasize our interest in getting to 100% in-person learning delivered safely as soon as possible. And our conversation this morning has focused on what school will look like if we're in phase 3. That's an if. We could be before that, or we may, if we are after phase 3, schooling would look differently. It would not have the same level of restrictions. And that's the same also if we go into phase 3 after the start of the school year. We would switch off of this model. We need to be prepared to switch delivery models depending on the phase. So just know that we don't take our decisions lightly, and we will continue to receive feedback and listen to questions, because that's going to inform our planning process. So thank you.
Thank you. And to those of you, if we didn't get to your questions, you will have opportunities. The Loudoun School Board will be continuing to meet. And I know that you have different groups set up, so there'll be opportunities. All resources that were mentioned on this panel discussion, we will have links up, and we'll advertise them on Facebook pages and websites and other venues, so you can get information yourself and read the guidance that both the state and your Loudoun County school system is considering. So thank you all. We appreciate it. You all did a great job, and you were very illuminating for our viewers. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.